So hello, welcome everyone to the W3C call for 12th of February 2020. I think we all know each other on the call, so I will skip introductions for now and just move straight to sharing my screen. This is very much a kind of housekeeping session. We've got a whole bunch of issues attached to the opportunity specification, and I thought we could just go through a number of these and hopefully put a lot of them to bed. And then if we move through those with sufficient speed, we've got generous space allocated for any other business. So let me just get the slides up here. Okay, so here's the agenda. The first one on the agenda is, I think, probably the most important of these, purely in a technical sense, that I suppose you run the risk of breaking things if this isn't done right. This is to do with a sort of fairly basic part of the JSON-linked data specification, which is that the type and the ID attributes are both supposed to be prefixed with an @ symbol, strictly speaking. It's a fairly common pattern in JSONLD to allow aliasing between non-prefixed and prefixed type and ID attributes, simply because the @ sign plays havoc with certain kinds, standard kinds of JavaScript parsing. So in the current version of the specification, type and ID are both not prefixed. However, we should probably try to conform to the JSONLD schema and support these with the @ signs. And ultimately, in the long run, I think do away with supporting them without the @ signs. But the proposal linked here is simply to support both in the specification, so it's not a breaking change. My own feeling about this is that it's kind of a no-brainer. Possibly we should have done this earlier. But does anybody have any objections to simply moving forward with this?
No.
No, nor me, except to register a complaint that I don't like don't like the standard. But,
right.
But it's there, and it makes sense.
As in, you don't like the JSONLD.
I don't like the @ type @ ID. I don't really understand why they. I guess they needed to say this is really our type and our ID, not some type and ID that you simply made up in your schema. It feels odd to me.
Yeah, particularly when it so readily breaks things.
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the best thought through part of JSONLD, definitely.
Yeah, I can definitely hear you on that one, Chris. I've personally fought against this for a while in terms of my own, just mentally getting my head around the idea that this actually might be a standard that is the thing that we need to do. But I think probably the most obvious thing initially was let's not use it because it is ugly and breaks some stuff. But then actually when you start using existing tooling that works with JSONLD and stuff that works with schema.org and the benefits of all the standards we've built on top of, and everything breaks because there's no ats in there, and suddenly you find yourself in the reverse position. Yeah, maybe it just makes more sense to just do what everyone else is doing rather than try and rebel against the system.
Yeah, part of the reason I particularly wanted this call was want to be on this call was a slightly sort of nefarious one, which was that I'm working with another hat on a carbon reporting data format, and have been wondering just how important the @ symbols are and the JSONLD stuff is. And so I thought I'd take the opportunity to leech onto this and listen to someone from the ODI talking about whether it's important or not. So,
well, if it's helpful, the tooling that we've got for all the OpenActive stuff now uses, now when you deserialize, it accepts both, but when you serialize, it uses the @ symbol. And right. it was fairly painful to do that, because to actually to allow it to serialize both, is actually difficult to do in a lot of JSON parsers. Sorry, deserialize both.
Yeah.
So you end up with a kind of general string find and replace happening before you do the deserialization, which is horrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, is inefficient, especially with large blobs of JSON. So I think, yeah, if we had our time again, going back 5 years ago, where the first conversation about aliasing at and type to not use the ats, I think maybe in hindsight it would have been better just to keep the ats from the beginning. I don't think we really benefited from not having the ats, other than just like slightly feeling nicer about it when you're coding. But ultimately, now we're going to have code that supports both. So that's just not the best thing.
Okay, I'll stop taking us off into the history lessons thing and to bring us back to the decision at hand then. But that's good advice, and I'm going to take that back to the guys working on the carbon emissions modeling stuff that I'm working on as well.
Okay, so I guess the consensus is the @ sign is ugly, but it's in there, and we need to support it.
Standards yay is summary, right?
Standards yay, yes. Recht und schlecht, as the Germans say, correct and horrible. Okay, so that's that one down, I think. Okay, the next one on the agenda is a little bit knottier. It's to do with addresses which are kind of only partially specifiable. And we get a lot of these in the England athletics feeds and a couple of the other ones that are more outdoor oriented. As the specification currently stands, if you've got an address field, all of the attributes are required. So street number, street name, postcode, that kind of stuff. So the proposal would be to loosen up that requirement a bit so that you can do things like at Run Club Banner Thames Path off St. Andrews Close 8NY, whatever the postcode is there. SE28 8NY. I actually have my doubts about this one because looking at the specification more closely, it is allowable to put a string into the location field, into the address field, I should say. So I wonder if we're not actually already covered here.
Yeah, the problem with that is that string in the address field was one of those, like, let's keep this in there because that might be helpful for people that don't have proper formatted addresses. It turns out to be very difficult to do the reverse. If you have only a string field for an address, to go from that to components of an address turns out to be a very, very much a non-trivial problem. So yeah, you're in a situation where if you, for example, if you're trying to geocode the address because there's no geo coordinates and you haven't got the components, then yeah, depending on the geo the coder you're using, you could be slightly stuffed. So there's a benefit in having the components available if possible. But I suppose the challenge at the moment is that either you have to supply an address and all the fields of the address, which I think we originally did because there are some applications specifically, and I think Google Reserve was a big driver for it at the time, that require all the fields so that you can have your so you can be featured on Google Maps. And obviously, while they're not yet using the data, but still talking about it, it's good to have that in the back of our minds. But I guess the challenge is then that we drive people towards a totally free text field, which maybe is the opposite. So maybe it's one of those things where we provide stricter guidance, or something in the validator that goes off and says your stuff won't be featured in Google, or whatever it is that we need to be compelling about it. And maybe a data profile, Tim, I know you're looking at that separately, something like that, but maybe as a strict conformance, like if you haven't got a second line of the address, then you fail validation, is too strict. That I guess is a suggestion, so that we can allow some of these guys to use the postcode they have in the postcode field without having a first line of the address, and without mangling it all into one field.
Yeah, yeah, that makes complete sense for me in terms of, like, you want to be able to give people the flexibility, especially with, as you say, some these more kind of outdoor activities where there isn't really an address, or the address you might put probably isn't quite where you would go. So you can imagine putting the address for the car park of some forest, but you have to kind of like, I don't know, make your way to the cafe thereafter to start whatever activity you're doing. Is there, without wanting to kind of, maybe that's the mangling, but is there some sort of halfway house where postcode is like a required element versus other things? You know, you can have your string but also have a postcode, or does that kind of still not really meet what people would need from a using the data perspective?
I guess that's, well, I suppose that's the question, is it how much do we relax the requirements to is postcode does seem quite important for accurate geocoding, and should exist in most cases. Otherwise it's just a string. So I could see that argument. Maybe that's the minimum.
Yeah, I mean, that works better for the UK. I think postcodes in most other countries are much wider, so they're not as valuable, but certainly in the UK context. It's a,
And I do wonder with a lot of, you know, if it's a hike in the Yorkshire Dales, you might end up not somewhere the post office would consider to have a location. You know, if it's just a car park on a at a trailhead somewhere. It is very. I understand both ends of the equation, but it is very frustrating when a form's demanding something that you simply can't give it. Honestly, if you then give it something wrong, what happens with the geo processing down the line is it's going to also kind of spit out something that's a bit weird too. Is it maybe one of the cases where we can do a kind of an either or, that you could put a lat long in or a well specified address, and if we get one or the other, then that's good enough for us to know where it is?
Oh, I like that idea. So you've got well specified address standalone, or vaguely specified address with a lat long.
Yeah.
I think that's what the standard's already got, actually.
I don't think it supports the vaguely specified address with so it does have an either or currently. So it says geo or location, but with the fields within the location, with geo or address, the fields within address are always required. Whereas I guess this proposal is to have the fields within address only required when we don't have geo. Slightly more complicated logic, but yeah.
Would
Okay.
that support this example though? Because I'm guessing, does this athletics club, it's an open question, I don't know, but does this athletics club, I mean, have the lat long, or how easy is that to put in, if that makes sense?
Well, I suppose the point is that without a lat long and without an address that has the relevant fields, you're not going to. Well, I suppose I see what you're saying. You could argue that a postcode alone, which might be all they have, actually does still give you some kind of geo. So you can put the pin on the map still, and I guess this proposal we'd lose that.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I take the point though that works much better in England than other countries, because as you say, postcodes are pretty broad elsewhere. Doesn't feel like there's an easy answer to this one.
Well, I wonder whether this is a data quality issue, because I know some of the whole point of having a data profile is that you can say, you know, these many addresses are probably not going to be found by most people who are using the data. So, but the thing at the moment is that it's a hard fail, like that your validator will fully fail. So I guess when we move towards fully automated validation with some of the tooling that's being developed at the moment, for example, there's a automated tool to test the booking spec at the moment, and the booking spec, which is based on the same modeling spec, has the same required fields. And so at the moment, your booking implementation will fail if you don't have 5 lines of an address, which seems quite harsh to judge someone's booking implementation on the basis of whether they filled those fields out. But I guess that's the reality. So it's almost saying technically your integration is currently failing because you don't have these things, and maybe that is a bit harsh But then I guess where the line is further down than that, I don't know.
I guess if you go for the either or, geo or vaguely specified address, essentially what you're doing is you're forcing some kind of workflow onto England Athletics in this example, to derive their geolocation from their postcode, which in the UK is fine. And in the non-UK case, I think that's something you have to do anyway, because if all you've got is a postcode and you're in the US or Canada, you know, you're not narrowing it down to anything more than a sort of probably 5 or 6 kilometer radius, in which case you definitely need to supply more data anyway.
Yeah, I like what you're, so basically you're saying we should force them to have a geo. If all they've got is postcode, they should at least give us geo. And if all they've got is postcode, it's probably not that accurate anyway. So we should really hard fail them because it's not usable, really. I mean, if we're if even in the UK, if you're just sticking a pin where the postcode is and telling people to turn up there, that's like not really going to work, is it?
I wonder whether, like, given, I'm not entirely sure, sorry, Chris, what organization you represent, but I don't think any of us represent data publishers here. So I guess it's kind of a harder, like, I wonder whether we need to kind of go back and say how, or maybe part of the data profiling you're doing, Tim, just to understand how many people would fail this, if that makes sense. Like, how much of a breaking change is it almost to, maybe it's not a breaking change though, is it?
In terms of profiling, I've been looking at various activity finders, and what's been clear is how valuable postcode or geo information is actually. I can't tell what's happening underneath the hood of these, but most of them allow a search by postcode. So I think in terms of getting your data used in the UK, you definitely have to supply a parsable postcode at some point. So it would definitely be of value to data publishers. How feasible it is for them to publish, I guess, is a good question.
I've just checked, and the Run Together feed for athletics does have geo.
Okay, right. So they're already providing that.
Yeah, and I guess
maybe I'm worrying over nothing.
Well, it's a good question. Yeah, I'll just check cycling as well, because I think if cycling does it, they're the two main ones, aren't they? Cycling and running that meet random places. But it's I think they've got the same issue, right? Because they ultimately have to put a pin on the map, and it's unlikely they'll just capture a postcode and be done with it. You'd have thought. Yeah, cycling has it.
Okay, so they're already providing geo.
Yeah, and in the case, in cycling's case, they actually are providing fly lines and address in a lot of cases too, but not always. Sometimes there's only 3, and sometimes it's just a postcode with a country.
Okay, so would the recommendation then be essentially Chris's, that we allow addresses that consist only of a postcode or geo? If you're missing geo, you must require all fields. But to verify this with data publishers to make sure this is feasible for them.
Yeah, that sounds like a sensible approach.
Okay, so a slight softening of the spec prospectively.
Yeah, and maybe something in there around data profiling, or we keep a recommendation or warnings in there around the other fields. So maybe we move them to recommended rather than optional.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, that sounds sensible. Good.
I've just noticed Guy's appeared. Hi, Guy.
Just dropping on quietly in the background. Sit down. Just dropping on quietly in the background.
Oh, wonderful. Did you have any thoughts?
No, just been listening in at the moment.
Great. Just realised that we didn't say hi earlier.
That's all right. I was slightly late, so I was kind of sneaking in at the back and quietly taking my seat.
Brilliant. Sorry for ousting you there.
No worries.
Okay. Indicative offers. Okay. So I'm actually not too sure of what use case is driving this. Maybe Nick has got a better idea. So this is essentially
Which one, Tim?
Oh, so what's that, Chris?
I think we skipped one. When start date and start.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, start date. Thank you, Chris. Good catch. Start date and end date must have a time component. Yeah. So right now, start dates and end dates can have either date time, so fully specified down to the seconds if so desired, and they can also just be specified as dates, so simply the day of the event being given. Should we tighten the screws on this a bit so that there is a time component being mandatory? I find it hard to picture a situation in which you don't want to have the start time, but I believe
The only one I know of is like triathlon. So I don't think it's not that they want. It's not that they don't want to have a start time. It's just that start time for them is like difficult to put in because, for example, so I spoke to Jenny Vincent at Triathlon about this a month ago or so, and she was explaining that you might turn up for a triathlon and there's like several different events going on the same day. You kind of go in waves. You might not start the cycle at a specific time. It's just whenever you get out of the swim or whatever. Or it seemed to be kind of, I'm not the best person to understand triathlon, but it seemed to be kind of a bit of a complicated way. So they don't really give in the data that they capture at least and publish. They don't have a start time, and that's kind of difficult for them because it's not really a session. It's more like you turn up for the day and there are several different types of events happening throughout the course of the day. They're the only one I know of, but there may be others who have kind of like a difficulty. But I also know that the main aggregator almost of this data being IMIN, I know that they actually can't use that data because the time is also an issue for that. So yeah, I think it's kind of that balance between practically, as you said, everyone who's using that data wants to show what time the event starts. So yeah.
It might be helpful to point out that the proposal that's referenced here is actually only referring to scheduled session rather than headline event, which is what triathlon is. So it wouldn't change triathlon's current situation necessarily. That's helpful.
Okay, so scheduled session being like class at 7 p.m. type thing.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. It's kind of highlighting a bit of an obscure, almost like we've missed something, because exactly, scheduled session is for classes at 7 p.m. and recurrence, so like every Thursday at 7 p.m. But at the moment, it's possible to have a class at 7 p.m. without a start time, which would mean just saying there's yoga on Thursday. Which
right, yes, that makes sense.
I mean, this seems to be more of a validator issue than a specification issue in that case. In that, I feel like it's awkward to specify different possible value types for start date and end date in the specification itself, depending on the kind of event that it's attached to, but that it might make sense to do that as part of application logic.
What you could do is just add a bullet point for a scheduled session. Basically, for a scheduled session in the current spec in 5.6.8.1, all the way in there, there's like a list of points that scheduled session must conform to. Things like it must have an event status, it must have a URL. In there, it says that it must have a start date. It's required, and it must be explicitly provided or derived as part of a schedule. Now, a schedule has to have a start date, I believe. So it's a time. I believe it has to have a time. So if you're using a schedule, you've already got that benefit. Right. But basically, yeah, if we just added a sentence after that just said, or if a start date is provided, must. Capital must be include a time component. And then we could validate off the back of that, I suppose, because I guess we probably if we stick to the kind of current kind of rules around the validator, we shouldn't have, strictly speaking, anything the validator is hard failing on that isn't in the spec.
Mm-hmm.
So those things become data quality issues rather than kind of total failure.
Yeah, I
performance.
think that's right. Yeah. Thinking about the code for the validator, that's a bit hard to specify. You don't really.
Yeah, that's a good. I guess actually no, that would just be a rule. That would just be a separate rule. Wouldn't be in the model files. It would just.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just thinking, oh, not another layer of logic. Yeah, you're right.
The model file nightmares continue.
Okay.
Not this time.
Feasible and textually simple given the specification. Great. Okay. So now onto the issue that I was so keen to approach that I skipped the previous slide. Indicative offers, which is to say, offers for which a precise price cannot be given. I'm not sure under what circumstances this actually arises.
Oh, this is Gladstone's.
Okay.
And the reason this came about was because, and I think this is the way that this is a perfect segue for Guy if I don't get this right.
That's a segue cue, I think. Yeah.
And I'm quite nervous at the moment.
So, yeah, exactly. I'm probably getting it all wrong. I think everyone active do this on their website, which is that there's an indicative. They've kind of got a bit. It's like a price matrix of like adult and child prices for different peak and off-peak times, where they're not specifically saying that like this slot is definitely that. You can click on a thing and it comes up, and there's a grid of indicative prices, and you kind of have to use your own thinking to go, oh, the thing I'm looking at is at this, probably it's off peak, so probably that one in the grid. Is that right, Guy?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Yeah, because so much of certainly for their current kind of online booking systems, because it's always member-led against a specific person. Everyone who books has got a record in the database, and they know exactly what the price is going to be for that person. But I guess, is this kind of the situation we're starting to talk about, where until you go through that booking process, and depending on whether you're adult or junior, or you this member or that member, or whatever it may be, it's that, how do you do that, those kind of headline pricing, where it could be at the stage of offering the availability, we don't know whether you're adult or junior, or which I guess you get.
Sorry, go on.
I mean, I think we already have that difficulty with the booking specification, right? Where because people aren't authenticated, you end up getting a headline price, which may not be the price that you get once all discounts have been applied. But this is something different, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, I think it's slightly different. So I'm just going into Fusion's facilities feed. I think it's this seems to be a facilities thing in Gladstone, where which is called, the language in Gladstone is an activity, isn't it? So I think at the level of the facility, you have these price bands or something. I can't remember the name of them. In Fusion,
you've got the time bands, peak and off peak, but because you're any given kind of slot at a slot level, you know whether at that point whether it's a peak or an off peak time band based on the slot you're looking to book.
Yes.
So is there? Sorry, I'm still getting to grips with familiarise myself with the whole feeds and everything. So a facility level, at a facility use level, is there a pricing indication at that level at the moment in the specification?
That's the thing, exactly. So at the moment, the only place we've got in the spec to put a price is in the slot itself, which is the accurate price for that slot.
Yeah, so that'd be where you then know that slot is at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's an off-peak time, that slot is 6 o'clock in the evening, that's peak time, and therefore it can put the various pricing within the offers to go, right, off-peak adult, off-peak junior, peak adult, peak junior, and you've got that granularity that you know exactly when they're booking for. But at a facility use level where you're just going badminton, it's like, well, depends who you are, depends when you book, and there could be potentially 6 different prices that you might pay for that based on, is it peak or off peak, are you adult, junior, concession,
yes,
etc.
Exactly that. Exactly that. In fact, I'm gonna just send Tim a screenshot of what I'm what I found on the Everyone Active website, which kind of summarizes that graphically, because yes, as Guy says, that's where you don't know at the facility level what it is. So if you want to display something useful against just the words badminton, you can't put an actual price in, because as Guy says, at that level you don't know, because it depends on the time. But it might be helpful to have, there we go, just dropped in Slack. It might be helpful to have that, as Everyone Active have it displayed elsewhere on the website, so you can see what kind of rough pricing you're looking at, I guess.
Okay, so I'm seeing the indication. Sorry, what I'm lost with here is we don't publish this kind of data, right? I mean, we only publish individual slots and so on.
So this is actually being used as a beta field right now in the Gladstone feeds.
Mm-hmm.
So that data is being published using, and I think in a couple of other cases, looking at the participant use it as well, looking at the proposal. So that's where it's being used at the moment.
But yeah, sorry, I'm just puzzled because an opportunity feed is indeed a feed of opportunities or of slots, each of which will have a specific time already associated. Oh, sorry, I guess this is with things like session series and so forth. Is that where these kinds of
could you possibly bring up the GitHub issue on the screen? And just scroll down.
Okay. Down to the example here?
Well, I've just added to the image to the bottom. That might be.
Okay, thanks.
To really make it up. So that's the practical example. So where you'd want to render this data is on that screen. That's where they're rendering it. And so right now in our feeds, without using the beta field, you have no way of conveying that grid at this level without actually saying, I want the 9 p.m. class or my 9 p.m. squash court.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, so this is the session series or facility use level, right? Okay, so before you drill down to individual instances, you want this kind of indication as displayed. Okay, I see. And does the beta property adequately cater for this reality?
Yeah, right now it does. I mean, it's very basic at the moment. It just gives you an indicative price. Sorry, an indicative offer type, and it includes, yeah, it's got and the way it's being used in Everyone Active is that it's concatenating the two. I guess, Guy, this must be the time band and the price level. Is that right? So you've got junior : off peak. I assume that's what that is. Oh, sorry. So we can't hear you if you are talking.
A lot of background noise. Yes, it is that. That identifier is the concatenation of the time band ID and the or the price level ID and the time band ID in our terms.
Yeah, yeah. So that works in so much as for a human reading that, you've just got, I can see it's clearly junior, off-peak, junior, peak. It has a max value, min value for age in there. I think that must be coming from the price level.
Yep.
Yeah, and so that's the age is covered, but we haven't really got the concept of on and off peak covered. So right now, if you wanted to render that grid, you have to do some manual string munging to figure out which one of those is peak and off peak. You can figure out the adult and junior based on the price, on the age range, but you can't do the peak and off peak part.
Or can you really do concession?
Oh yeah, that's true. Or concession, that's true. So I mean, yeah, it's a good point. Whether we want to put through what's there in the proposal, which is what is currently being used as a basic, at least it's a way of legitimately getting the data out there without using the beta property, or whether we want to do something to allow us to describe the data a little bit more fully.
Is there an existing standard for tabular data that we could use here?
Oh, I see. You mean just kind of make it generic, because it could be all sorts of things. So
Yeah, I can imagine that there would be lots and lots of possible variations on this. And it would be nice if we could borrow something rather than start trying to specify all those options ourselves.
yeah, it's a good idea. I don't know.
Okay, is that maybe the action point then, is to do some research into how we can more fully specify this?
Yeah, I guess my question for the group would be, do you think there's any use case that you can think of which you would want to understand more about the table than just that it's a table and that you need to render it? You would want to take those prices and do something with them.
Well, I mean, I would have thought if you had, somewhere in the tabular data, you could have something saying price. I mean, that would be a core data point for an offer. But it seems like the number of factors that could be taken into account to yield that price is fairly high. And this, I just don't see how we get from the example given in the issue to the rendered display without a lot of application intelligence outside the specification, say.
Yeah, so I mean, if Stephen was on the call from GLL, he would tell tales of how they've spent an enormous amount of time trying to extract this data from Legend to create, I think he might have said this on the last call, to create this exact table, which I know that GLL now have on their website.
Right.
But it's been quite a lot of business logic, as you say, because it's not been easy to just get the table format from what's in there. So yeah, seems like that is a standing problem.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like schema.org has a data set type that is there. What Google is using for tabular data when it wants to pick it up. Google says we can understand structured data in web pages about datasets using either the schema.org dataset markup or W3C's data catalog vocabulary formats. We're also exploring experimental support for structured data based on W3C CSVW. I'll send you a link to this. What I'm reading.
Yeah, I think that's describing something a bit different. Hold on, what would it be? Oh, thank you. Thank you for the link, which is in group chat, everyone. Yeah, this is a whole other level of complexity, I think. Yeah, this is really saying there's a whole raft of information somewhere else that I am here describing. But it probably is. This is really a howitzer approach, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I guess for now we could. It sounds like a kind of desk exercise to figure out what the options for representing a table are. If that's going to kind of hit the only thing I can think of where that might not be is when you want to use a voice or a screen reader or something that's not visual, and we're kind of forcing it into a bit of a visual representation. That's the only thing I can, like let's say I asked Alexa, how much is badminton in the local leisure centre? Well, I guess it could read the table headings, couldn't it? It could say badminton for adult juniors or something.
No, there was a time when tables were the only thing screen readers could really properly parse, which was not that user friendly, but they could do it accurately.
Just read the table out, basically, is what you're thinking.
Well, I mean, I'm going way back to when tables were a common hack for what we ought to be using CSS for now. But it was very friendly for screen readers to lay things out using tables, because the order is clear. Or other forms of markup, what's going on. So I don't know. Yeah, I think the accessibility implications could be, or the alternate media implications could be tricky. But again, if we find an existing way of doing this, presumably somebody will have thought through those issues for us, ideally.
The other question, which is a bit of a hypothetical one, is if displaying it in a tabular format would mean that you had to show the whole of the table. This might just be my lack of coding knowledge, but you could imagine a scenario where someone's creating some product that's just for kids, for example. So you only want to show the junior prices. So yeah, I don't know of any off the top of my head, so extremely hypothetical, but yeah, just something to maybe see as we go through this, see if there's a way of extracting just the relevant bits that you care about as a product.
Yeah, it's a tricky question. How do you display information before you know specifically what's being looked for?
Well, actually, you know what? I think this is a bigger problem. Love when that's the case. But our offers generally that we have right now, I think, have the same issue in that right now, if you've got a junior or an adult price, you can easily filter those using age range to an extent, because that's an offer property. But you can't right now do the same thing for concession or for the discount card pricing that we were talking about in the last call, to kind of describe, and I guess peak and off peak. So maybe this is actually the other way of looking at it rather than tables is actually how do we describe our offers better so that we can filter them? Because if you can describe peak and off peak and concession and discount card somehow, then you can construct a table from that, or you can use it more intelligently.
Yeah, okay, hold on. This is a rat's nest, actually, yeah. Which ties in usefully to some questions about the booking specification, right? Yeah, how a broker selects the correct price and displays it to the user based on what criteria?
Right, because I guess right now what offer really just supports is just a list of names and prices. So you a proper price list. So you've got like adult colons, £7, junior colons, whatever. But as soon as that pricing becomes slightly more nuanced and you can't get it in a string anymore, it's like adult off peak or adult 30% discount because of MCR membership or whatever, then it kind of breaks because we only got a string and an age range.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I agree with Nick here that this is actually a different problem And it's really about what additional information you need to attach to offers to make them intelligently parsable by machines.
So in which case would we? I mean, indicative offer is basically saying this is not the offer. This is one of the many offers that could be available within the thing. So does it? It sounds like what it's saying is maybe is this basically blocked until we figure out what the other answer is, and then we can come back and look at this with fresh eyes and figure out what this then looks like in that world.
I think so, because I think the challenge in the booking specification is I've got 10, so let's say 12. I've got 12 offers, and each with its own price and different criteria feeding into what's determined that price. How do I select the right one? And the problem with indicative offer seems to be, how do I display all of them in an intelligible way?
What I had in my head before I actually looked at the example was something a bit like, tickets for a band, where you say tickets from £20 to £70, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are tickets available for this band, but until you drill down and choose your seat and decide whether you're standing and blah, 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 you don't know which one of those you're getting and what's available. So I did wonder whether a sort of a range on an indicative offer, given that you can't book these, that we've already sort of taken them out of that, would mean you don't have to crawl down to every possible combination of age, time of day, card carryingness and what have you, in order to at least establish whether this is an offer that is of interest to you. Because if the range is way too expensive for what you'd like to do, then you just pass over it without, and we've saved ourselves potentially a level of parsing and extraction. And maybe that's a representation, and I'd turn that over to the data provider around here to say whether that's actually easier or harder to provide from the data that they store. But I just wanted to throw that out as an option, rather than having to design the whole tabular thing inside the indicative offers, which seems like a lot of detail for what is ultimately not actually a detailed thing.
Yeah, it's tricky, because I feel like the use case is typically more fine-grained in the sector. So as you say, yeah, for gig tickets where you've got a huge range, right? If you're sitting behind a pillar, it might be a £5, and front row seats or balcony seats will be 75 quid. Fitness classes, it seems like the range is much, much more narrow. But curiously, it seems like practice in the sector is to be quite a bit more detailed about what you can expect. Just to judge by the examples attached to the issue, and other discussions around booking.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Although I can see the benefit in having a from price if it is indicative, because that's. I'm just trying to think what activities, like you say, practically, what's the example where you would want to do that? It would probably be something like, be a bit more expensive, right? It'd be like wakeboarding, or something,
Yeah.
surfing class, which starts from £75, and it depends if you book it on what day that it might be more.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably, yeah. I can imagine stuff that's in the kind of more leisure rather than sport, probably.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like the what's it called? The whitewater rafting you can do up in Lee Valley.
Okay, so I mean, maybe there's two separate pieces here. One of them is sort out offers generally, and then there's what kind of simplified representation is desirable, or what simplified representations are desirable across the sector. But I think having a sort of blanket proposal for, here's just a range is a bit tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in some cases, I think that you can get, there will be free or charged depending on if you fall into certain categories. So you end up with these kind of funny ranges, like either there's a charge or there's not. Frustrating.
So if you do have all of the data on the offers, you as a representation, you can parse that out and say it's between free and £100. But it's yeah, I was just trying to work out what we were doing with this indicative offers that wasn't. It sounds like probably the best step is to see what offers get sorted out to, and then decide whether that solves this or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this one, it seems so simple from a distance. Okay, so this one needs more research done, I guess. Estimated durations. This is a fairly tangled thread on this one. And it's essentially just to allow us to get some, a certain range, really, for activities that could take, you know, some very varied amount of time. Can we not express duration as a range right now, Nick?
No, right now it's so schema.org is forced at the moment. You've just got duration, which is a set time, which is with a certain format. So it has to be ISO, whatever it is, 8601. I think, yes, 8601.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is it's kind of a required, like the validator will check whether the start date and the end date together are the durations amount apart.
Right.
And the kind of main reason this breaks is when you've got running events, because obviously the length of your run will vary in terms of time, duration, depending on the speed of your run, if it's a fixed distance. And so, and in Parkrun's case, curiously, I was just reading through the thread, they actually said they'd rather not put an end time on because they find it discourages people from participating if there's an expectation.
Would it make sense then? Well, I think duration is optional anyway, isn't it?
I think start maybe one of end time or duration mandatory. Not sure. Hang on. Duration's recommended, end time is required.
Oh, okay, right, and that's why there's the extended discussion on the thread about. Yeah, you might say that end time is 2 hours in the future, despite the fact that it might only take you 90 minutes or something to do the run or whatever.
Yeah, I think what Pete was saying, so Pete works at ClubSpark, which powers England Athletics' Run Together website. I think what Pete was trying to say there was that although we could just admit, as Parkrun, Ian was saying, we could just omit it completely because it's a run, it just has a start time. Actually, it's quite useful to plan your time if you know it's going to be roughly between 1 and 3 hours, rather than between 6 and 10.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was what he was kind of proposing, is there was, and what actually they capture in their, I think at the moment in their Finder, is this kind of rough ranges of times.
Yeah, because it strikes me that what we really want here is in fact a range, right? That, yeah, it's, although there will be variations in ability, you know, such and such a run is not going to take you less than 15 minutes and not more than 2 hours.
Yes, so the beta property that's proposed here and in use in Run Together is a range. And I think the proposal here is to use estimated duration as a range when that's relevant. Otherwise, to use duration when it's an actual duration that's fixed for activities where, for example, you don't really want a range where you're talking about a squash court booking.
I see Parkrun's point though. I can imagine, as you know, I'm not a runner, I'm exceptionally slow, in fact. So I can see thinking like, oh crap, I've got to do 5k in half an hour. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that sort of thing. That it might put someone off. So would you see this property as being kind of a like we were talking about earlier, like you've got to have end time or end data, sorry, or duration, or would you kind of give people the option? I mean, what are you kind of envisaging?
I think we do need to soften it. London Sport has indicated the same thing, particularly with regard to the OpenActive target audience of the sedentary, that it is very easy to put people off, and it's also very hard to estimate how long it's going to take previously inactive people to do something. So I think probably we do want to say something like, if you have a start date and a duration, then start date plus duration must equal end date. However, if you've got estimated duration, end date becomes well, it's tricky because the semantics of end date change basically. It becomes a will not extend beyond kind of property.
Yeah, you could have like start time. Well, I suppose the question is, for a park run, they don't want to provide anything. They would just want to put a start time on its own in, because that's what's on their website, and anything they create around duration or end time or end date would be, yeah, that would they'd just be making that up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just for conformance sake.
No.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, what's the purpose of it, right? The purpose is to my understanding, unless there's something else that I'm missing, is to help a consumer make a better decision, right? So yeah, I can totally see why I wouldn't expect to have a run or a less formal cycle kind of thing to have a end time. I might want to know that it finishes on the same day. Like, I wasn't expected to keep running for 48 hours, or maybe I am, and that's fine if you're doing one of those like mad, like 140-mile run things that people do. But yeah, I think in some cases it's actually, definitely with a class, I think there's different use cases, isn't it? For a class, like you were saying, definitely you'd expect that kind of like, I want to know if it's an hour or half an hour or 2 hours. But for something more flexible, I think we need to allow that flexibility, I feel. I don't know.
So would it be fair to say that within a slot, which is a particular type of event, that we would keep the end time and the duration as they are required, and maybe within a scheduled session, and potentially an event and headline event, that you then make them recommended rather than required for end time and duration, and then accept this additional property as another option for estimated duration, which is also recommended as an alternative but not required.
That sounds sensible, yeah.
Yep, that sounds like a workable proposal.
I'm a little bit nervous about missing end dates, just thinking about searching for things that intersect with a time or date range. You'd end up with logic to have to work out what that really meant. I was looking at Nick's Peter's example in the proposal, and the literal ISO 8661 parsing of end date he's got there is it ends 17 hours before it started, which would probably mean nothing would ever find it if it was doing a date-based search. So I just want to guard against that because I've done quite a bit of stuff with start and end dates. It is quite tough if you have a null there to know what that null really means. And it makes your logic very difficult. You sort of have to cast an end date that's infinitely far in the future, if null or something like that, in order to do the search properly.
Yeah, that also doesn't sound ideal.
No, that's really interesting, because I didn't spot that, and you're right. That example he's got there could, yes, a basic implementation of that would definitely break, wouldn't it? Because it looks like it's the end date before the start date. If it just sets it to midnight, so maybe null would be a more accurate representation of the data, but equally would break all the search.
Sorry, I've realized we've run over time now. So can I just assign? Can I ask you, Chris, to add that issue on that comment onto that issue, so that we can revive this discussion?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh dear. Okay, and we've. I'm afraid we've still got an extra issue to address. However, we are flat out of time. I think let's move quickly over unlimited attendee capacity and move on straight to any other business, just to make sure that we're not missing anything urgent people are bringing to the call.
Nothing from my side.
Nothing from me.
Nor me.
No.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. This was a more involved conversation than I've been expecting, but I think it was extremely useful. So thank you very much, and talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Thanks, Tim. Thanks all.
You guys.
Yes, bye guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, guys.